They enroll about 10 million students every year here in the United States, which represents about half of the nation's undergraduates. And community colleges represent a key path to the middle class for many low-income and minority students. In fact, if you think about access to college among low-income African-American and Hispanic students, Bronx Community College, which is just across the river from us, serves more of these students than the entire Ivy League. And although there have been some increases in tuition in recent years, community colleges remain very low cost, and they provide an excellent return on investment for those who graduate. An associate degree yields 13% higher earnings for men and 22% higher earnings for females in comparison to a high school diploma. But the problem is that only a little over a third of community college students graduate within 6 years. And part of the reason for that is that many community college students are low income, and so they're struggling to balance school with employment and sometimes with raising a family. And a lot of community colleges students are also the first in their family to ever attend college, what's known as a first-generation college student. So Dr. Garcia, according to your bio, you were a first-generation college student yourself.
I am.
Can you talk a little bit about the challenges that face a student who's the first in the family to attend college and how colleges can try to support such students to succeed?
Sure. Thank you. Well, first of all, you have to remember with first-generation college students, we know nothing about college. We don't have someone at home to talk to us about that. I grew up in downtown Brooklyn and in the housing projects of Farragut and Fort Greene. And quite frankly, I was the first one in the neighborhood to go to college, so I didn't have someone to talk about that. And so what you need to do at community colleges and at four-year institutions, regardless of where a student goes, is to talk about campus climate. First of all, how are we welcoming students when they come in that are first in their families to come into those colleges? Who is there to support them? Who are going to be their peer mentors? That's extremely important. The other thing is that you're coming out of a high school where everything is so structured, and you need someone to help students understand the pathways. What are the courses they need to take? Why do they need to take their courses? What are their dreams and aspirations? That's so important. And I always talk about having faculty and staff that look like your students. If we're not doing that, we're really not doing justice to our students who are coming in, who are the new majority in this country. And how are we working on that? The other thing is financial aid, obviously. First generation low-income students, underrepresented students. We're working 2 and 3 jobs as we go to school. So we have to think about scholarships, number one, and if not only scholarships, how do we create positions, meaningful positions, not just getting coffee and making copies, but meaningful positions on campus that will pay them to work on campus, which, by the way, if you look at the research, those students that work on campus while they're going to school retain at a higher rate than those that do not. And so they then create partnerships and relationships with those that they are working with. And the last thing I'm going to mention is student support services. All types of student support services, from peer mentors to tutoring, to making sure that the support services are there for these students regardless of what they need. They may even need something out in the community. How do we connect them to the community to have daycare, for example? So all of the connecting with community to ensure that students have the support services they need in order to be successful. Does that answer your question?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, thank you.
You're welcome.
Dr. Miles, a lot of the things that Dr. Garcia has talked about are big challenges for presidents to try to deal with on their campus. And presidents have a lot to do. Not only do they have to balance the budget and manage facilities, they take care of all the nuts and bolts details of managing a large institution, but now they also have to figure out how to help increase student success and inspire and engage their faculty and their administrators in doing that. So this is a big challenge, but at the same time, the majority of community college presidents are over the age of 60, which is nearly a decade older than they were 20 years ago. So a lot of observers are expecting a generational turnover in the presidency over the next few years. So what do you think are the implications of that generational shift for community colleges?
Well, you're right. It's really a big job. It's a huge role, and it's very different than it was 10, 20, 30 years ago. We're focusing laser-like on efforts such as completion. Our mission for a long time in community colleges has been focused on access. We are the open door institutions. This is stated very clearly in most of our missions. And that with that open door, we have become comprehensive institutions. We've been criticized in the past for trying to be everything to everyone. We have every type of program, lots of disciplines, all kinds of opportunities to go somewhere. So come in, come in, come in. We have lots of buildings, lots of services, and many of our activities and services have been focused on that front door experience. We are subsidized at the state level based on FTE, based on enrollments. That's shifting. So one of the key things to do is to understand the role. We are still responsible for all of those buildings, keeping them warm, keeping them cool, keeping them clean, making sure that the classes are staffed, that somebody has a schedule, that the community loves us, that we have resources for managing our special projects and initiatives, that we have diversity, that we have services for students. So looking at the breadth of the role, that the budget balances, et cetera. So making sure that we're keeping our skills sharp, and that we're also looking at succession planning very seriously. It's something that senior administrators have to do as well as boards of trustees. Take a look at their organizations. I just replaced an individual who had been in the role for 42 years. And so I've been on the job 3 months. So really being immersed into understanding how things are different than they were, and that those trustees need to understand as well what's going on. There are wonderful organizations that are helping with succession planning and leadership development. The Association of Community College Trustees works with the trustees and has sessions for senior administrators as well. The Futures Leaders Institute, Executive Leadership Institute, through organizations like League for Innovation. In the community colleges, I'm name dropping now, American Association of Community Colleges. These are excellent programs. And the AACC actually has a list of competencies for community college leaders that are very important to understand the breadth of the role. There will certainly be that turnover, and it's not only at the presidential level, it's also at the senior administrative level. I have a vice president who is retiring after 40 years of service at our institution. So that longevity has been welcome and has been really helpful to the organization, but we will see that turnover also at the ranks immediately beneath the presidency. So we have to be concerned about who's going to be in the pipeline. That being said, I like the part of the question that focuses on the completion agenda and the new challenges of helping students succeed, because it's not a new paradigm, it's just a new focus. Where we've been focused on the earlier part of the student journey, we now have to retool our institutions to look at completion. How are we advising students on the tail end of their journey so that they can leave as completers with a degree or credential in hand? And that means new types of positions, redefining job descriptions, and so forth. And so yes, a broad range of skills are needed, and we need to be looking not only at senior, seasoned professionals who are available. One of the implications will be that people will need to be geographically flexible, be prepared to move in their careers and may not stay at one institution for too long. The two individuals I described are becoming more and more rare. And so moving and managing a career in terms of how many years to be in a particular role, and having the courage to step forward when opportunities present themselves to take on that next opportunity, building the support to make sure that happens. And then also looking at emerging professionals, identifying individuals early in their career and helping to groom and shape and give them the opportunities to go to the sessions that will hone their skills, and also give them some of the challenge assignments that will help them to be able to take on those broader roles as they ascend within their careers.
Great, thank you. Dr. Gomez, one of the big challenges for community college presidents they're wrestling with right now is transfer. About 80% of first-time in college, community college students say that they want to transfer and earn a bachelor's degree, but only about 25% eventually do transfer to a four-year school. And then when they do transfer, many students find that they've taken courses at the community college that are not going to be accepted for credit in their major at the university to which they have gone. So they have to retake courses and credits that they really they don't have the time and money to afford, which can be really discouraging for a lot of students. So recently, CUNY here in the city of New York, which has 7 community colleges and some, I don't know, dozen, 15 senior colleges, they implemented a policy that tried to smooth the transfer pathway between the community colleges and the senior colleges, and it turned out to be a kind of controversial policy. Can you talk a little bit about the policy, why it was so controversial, and what you think are the pros and cons of it?
First, how many people here are from the City University of New York? You show of hands. Okay, good. This is just between us. Okay? Very quickly, I'm going to try to summarize the CUNY War of the Roses in 1972 to 2012 in a couple of minutes, because it has a very complicated history and the context is important. If we look at the policy itself, the so-called pathways, that's the P word that we don't use in CUNY anymore, the policy is a veritable no-brainer. It's Gen Ed 101, whether it's the Harvard report at the turn of the 20th century, the great books, the components of it are, you really can't argue with. And at advanced age, I can't remember all of them. I have to write them down. It's a common core of 30 credits made up of composition, mathematical competency, life and physical sciences, world culture, the U.S. experience and its diversity, creative expression, individual and society, and the scientific world. You could argue with that. The problem goes back to the founding, or the point where the university came together as an integrated unit, and you had the beginning of that conflict between the community colleges and the senior colleges and transfer. So we tried, for those of you that have ever seen Animal House, Dean Warren, you're on double secret probation. Well, we had our own double secret probation. 1972, the university passed a policy mandating transfer and full faith of credit. In 1978, passed another policy mandating transfer and full faith of credit. And then in 1982, you really have to listen this time and do it. The problem was that the faculty, we as a faculty, because I can't absolve myself from that, never really worked out the mechanics of this in terms of courses, credits, how they align, how they fail to align. And while we are structurally an integrated university, we are functionally a set of 27 individual units. Now, for better or for worse, the Board of Trustees, in an ultimate act of frustration, said, okay, you won't do it, we'll do it for you. And they invoked their right, which is even recognized by AAUP, that a Board of Trustees can set policy in curricular matters. And therein, ladies and gentlemen, lies the problem. Because that is the last sanctuary for the faculty in terms of control. It's curriculum. So how do you reconcile the faculty right to create and maintain curriculum with a Board of Trustees right to say, we're going to fix this one way or the other? Having the dual role of faculty member and administrator, depending on who you ask when, I kind of jump from one side to the other, which either makes me weak-willed or schizophrenic. The fact of the matter is there are no rights or wrongs other than the need to provide those transitions for our students. So in the end, the hope is, and I think the jury's still out in terms of how this will be implemented, that students will be able to successfully transfer. The competencies are not being argued anymore. Whether it's a 3-credit or a 4-credit course, we're talking about, differences without distinctions. They're not substantive. So that's all important. But again, after 40 years in the system, you're going to be a little skeptical. We are hoping that this will do what we need it to do, that students will be able to successfully transfer, to not have to repeat the credits. As we talk about the completion agenda, this is critically important because if they use up their financial aid, they cannot get a degree. My students in the South Bronx is still considered the poorest community or congressional district in the United States. 90%, according to the Annenberg Foundation, 90% of our students in the South Bronx who graduate from high school are not college ready. So we have a lot of work to do. We cannot afford to add another burden either to our faculty or to our students to figure out how to do credit matching. I think we have better things to do. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. So continuing on the topic of transfer, Dr. Garcia, you're at CSU Fullerton, and I imagine that you receive many of your students as transfers from the California community college system. So how do you think four-year and community colleges can work together best to create pathways that help more low-income, first-generation students to get the bachelor's degree that so many of them say that they want?
So first of all, we bring in 9,000 students a year. We have over 38,000 students. 4,500 of them every fall are transfer students. So we do bring in many, many transfer students. And I will say that I love the community college, and I went to the four-year institution because we are in an elitist business. An elitist business that looks down depending on what sector you're at. And I am now at the four-year college thinking about how do we make sure that those that start at the community college, like myself, by the way, get to the four-year institution and graduate. Because there are really barriers, and Dr. Gomez didn't talk about some of the things we did together that didn't continue, but I think are important if we really want underrepresented low-income students to finish a bachelor's degree if they so desire. And so what we did then, and I still think is really important, is to have relationships with the community colleges in your district, to make sure not only the administrators, but the chairs of departments as well as the faculty. And what Dr. Gomez didn't talk about is that we had a Ford Foundation grant that was really a very good grant that got together the faculty in math at both the community college and the four-year institution, where they got together and talked about what was needed to get through the community college into the four-year institution. So many of our students are not coming in with developmental needs, either at the community college or at the four-year institution. We did the same thing with English faculty. And so they got together and figured out a pathway through the disciplines. So the administrators were pulled out of the paradigm, let the faculty figure it out. What happened was, once the money goes away, there is not sustainable, intentional efforts to continue that. And it's hard work, because remember, it's different cultures, different communities at all of the institutions. But it is an important thing that we really need to start thinking about, is how do we work together with our partner community colleges. Four-year institutions, we know what our feeder institutions are. We need to have those partnerships, faculty to faculty, support services to student affairs. Let's not forget student affairs personnel. They're very important on our campuses, especially for low income and underrepresented students, to work together. The other thing we've mentioned before is when you do that, you make sure that students are not losing those credits when they come over to the four-year institution, because you're working together, both community college and four-year institution, to ensure they're taking the courses that are needed when they're graduating. And since the faculty get to know each other, they then have the confidence in saying, oh yes, Dr. So-and-so, I know that, and that they're really covering what we should be covering in the four-year institution. So those are the things that I would say. For students who are transferring, we should have a new student experience for transfer students, because regardless of what institution you come from, it's a different culture. How do you get around in financial aid? How do you get through to registration? Where are the professors you need to connect with? You know, once you're at an institution 2 years, 3 years, you get to know it. You go to a new environment, it's all brand new. So making sure that you have a new student experience so that transfer students understand where they're coming, what's happening, where they should get the information they need, I think that's very important. And let's not forget, at least what we're finding at my institution, that when community college students complete an associate's degree at a community college and transfer, they graduate at higher rates than my native students. They've been successful. And so we have to remember that. So we should get away that myth that community college students can't do it. That's not true. It's how do we help them to have those high standards and help them reach those high standards. And we have to work on that together if we truly believe we want African American, Latino, and low-income students to get a bachelor's degree that they want.
Thank you. Dr. Miles, let's talk about funding, which you mentioned a little bit earlier. So you noted that community colleges are typically funded according to course enrollment. So the college receives money for all students who are enrolled as of a specific census date, usually say 10 days into the semester. But increasingly, states are moving more towards what's called a performance funding model, in which colleges would be rewarded or penalized according to the outcomes of their students, not just whether they are enrolled in a course, but whether they complete that course, whether they complete a semester, whether they move to the next semester, whether they eventually graduate. So I know that SUNY's been having some conversations along these lines, and what do you see as the pros and the cons of the performance funding approach?
Well, the pros are that it gives institutions a way to truly transform themselves. We've seen reports now, our recent reports, your book, Redesigning Community Colleges, congratulations. We can't even buy it. I think we're having a challenge.
It's sold out on Amazon right now.
Isn't that wonderful? So congratulations, that's amazing. We will get it. We're on the wait list. Thank you very much. Okay. Also looking at reports such as the AACC's Reclaiming the American Dream, which challenges institutions to look at the 3 R's: resetting the dial, redesigning the student experience, and restructuring our institutions. So one of the pros, again, is restructuring your institution. You heard me comment about so many of our services being at the front end of the student experience, sort of the first 5 or 10 miles of the marathon. I came to Westchester Community College from a community college in Ohio, Cuyahoga Community College. Ohio has moved to be a pay-for-performance state. And so we've looked at the intricacies of how to have that transformation take place while we still value access. And we still have to have some special services and resources available for our most needy students, those who are underrepresented, those who are non-traditional, our older students, fully Pell eligible. So there's still some access resources available, but we've created there a very complex formula to look at various stages of completion and outcomes for students. Course completion, completion of certain benchmarks or progress status, 12 credits, 24 credits, 36 credits. So you're really rewarding retention in that regard. And then a portion of the formula designated for earning a credential, either a certificate or a full degree. And so it took some time to really develop that formula. It was a 3-year process that began with a portion of it based on the credential earnings, and then began to value more the student journey and course completion. And so it's complicated. It involves an inclusive, I would recommend a very inclusive approach. It's very disruptive because getting the word out to across the system within the classrooms that we're not counting students anymore in terms of FTE. What do we do on census day? Does that data matter? It's been so inculcated in our culture. It is what we do. It's what we know. And so it's very complex. It provides an opportunity for a lot of broad-based discussion across systems in order to facilitate that. And it really did get us to look at different types of positions and services for students that would help them to focus on completion. It did have implications for academic pathways, and in SUNY we're looking at beginning with a portion of the funding formula based on pathways to opportunities. Are we getting students into the workforce? Are there some career opportunities for students? And so I think that could be limiting, so we have to think very broadly. It's not only about those students who are in the applied programs. While that's very critical, we certainly do want to honor the transfer experience, and that's not going anywhere. But we have to look very broadly at the various elements that do support different stages of the student experience, and then put those dollars there. But it is transformative, and it is a major change effort that's underway, and it really means a lot of communication, a lot of collaboration, having faculty working closely with your senates, with your unions, to make sure that everyone understands just what's happening, so that it's not an overwhelming, disruptive type of experience within our institutions.
If you pass a performance funding model in your college, how does that impact faculty in the classroom, if at all?
Well, we certainly know that we need students to complete each course. And so we want to be very mindful of when students might be leaving. Are they withdrawing in large numbers? Because if they're not completing the course, they're not going to be able to get the credit benchmarks, the 12, the 24, the 36, et cetera. They're not going to be able to get through to completion. So we need faculty to think more about student engagement, the types of teaching methodologies that are helping students to learn, and also the types of resources that are available outside the classroom, stronger co-curricular experiences, as well as support services. There are successful models that are now mandating advising and tutoring. And we often say in community colleges that students don't do optional. So how do we build those experiences into their required activities while they're on campus? We know that their lives are busy and complex, and that they're coming in to take a course and often leaving to juggle a couple of jobs and family responsibilities. So if we can build in supplemental instruction that has the required study hour, making orientation mandatory, eliminating things like late registration so that they're in class for the full amount of time, looking at financial aid policies so that they can get book vouchers and resources, so that we are really focusing on eliminating those kinds of potential barriers, and having faculty engaged in understanding what those resources are and partnering more closely with their student affairs colleagues and peers.
Thank you. So, Dr. Miles mentioned financial aid. Dr. Gomez, President Obama's proposal for free community college was really big news earlier this year. But for many low-income students, community college is already essentially free because the federal Pell Grant typically covers, not in all colleges, but in many colleges, most or all of the tuition costs, because those costs remain really low. So what do you think about the proposal? Do you think this is the best use of new money? Or if we had that same pot of money to invest to support community colleges and their students, would that be how you would want to spend it, or are there other ways in which you think it would be useful to spend it?
First of all, I was recently in Washington at the Aspen Foundation, and the governor of Tennessee was really miffed that people were calling his plan the Obama plan, especially since he's a Republican. But whoever takes credit for it, in the absence of specifics, among the things that I think we have to consider is when is free free? Because depending on how this is structured financially, and let me just, for those of you that have worked in either with students, financial aid, packaging, or scholarships, if it is structured as gap funding, then it'll work. That is, if you get a certain amount from Pell, a certain amount from TAP, for those of you New York State residents, and there's a difference and you fill that, then that is new money. The current formulas, if you look at them, would actually be a disadvantage to students because the tuition costs are a significant part of the evaluation formula when you look at students' ability to pay. So, it's not quite as straightforward as some would like us to believe. And since I woke up this morning, literally, to Joe Biden making a PSA for the Obama plan, I'm saying this is a little too weird for my taste. So I think, this is where it gets a little dicey in terms of what is free, what is new funding. I worked with a member of this panel, who shall remain nameless, who did a research study some years back as a TC student, and looked at the impact of other factors on student attendance. And she found that, things like job responsibility, child care, other things influence a student's ability to persist to graduation. It's kind of common knowledge now. Back then, I thought it was particularly insightful and made me feel good because that was my bias. So all of that then makes me look at Ostos, for example, where I look at the data. 90% of our students start out as full-time. Less than 20%. Let me repeat that. Less than 20% of our students actually attend full-time through to completion. They become part-time, they stop out altogether. So, it seems to me that when we look at the formulas that encourage student participation and attendance, almost all of them are designed to encourage full-time attendance. And I'm really good with that. Get it done, move on. But the realities are, when I look at my students, they cannot do that. Life gets in the way. And if the formulas that we use are disincentives to continued attendance, it puts us all behind the 8 ball. So that having been said, that's kind of a huge disclaimer. If it's new money, trust me, I think there are 3 people on this panel that can come up with a million ways of spending new money. But, you know, and Millie touched on this earlier, Dr. Garcia, excuse me. Again, for those of us that work in institutions like Ostos, working with public schools and working with community-based organizations that serve our populations, the issue of college readiness is critical. And that's not going to go away. So, and rather than engage in what we've been doing for the last few decades in finger pointing, oh, it's a problem with the public school, no, you guys have the responsibility now, we have to figure out ways of working collaboratively. And there's some wonderful models nationwide. But in addition to that, and this is something that I discovered in my research in a previous life, we can't just work together. We have to look at the alignment or lack of alignment between the secondary curriculum and the post-secondary curriculum. I worked with a group of public school teachers in Brooklyn, and, you know, dumb me, I thought I kind of figured everything out. We were working on a summer preparation program for high school students. And we were looking at the curricula for the high school English and the college freshman English. And they didn't match. Wow, what a shock. So how do we expect students to come to us prepared when they are meeting one standard at the high school and are expected to achieve another standard at the college? Then we have students, and my daughters were just as victimized as anybody else, and everybody who has kids here who are now high school age. You get to your junior, senior year of high school, and you don't take math. If you satisfy your requirement in the 8th or 9th or 10th grade, you stop taking math. And then, because at CUNY we're particularly sadistic, when you come in, we don't say welcome, give you a cup of coffee, hi, good to see you at the college. You sit down for a 4 to 6 hour battery of tests where you're supposed to perform well on math, something that you may not have seen in 4 or 5 or 10 years. Now again, we have strategies to address that, but you know, ultimately, I think we just have to give ourselves collectively as an educational community a huge reality check. I mean, there are reasons why these things don't match, and it's incumbent upon us to start working on getting them to match. In addition, you know, again, if there's new money, childcare, internships, business and employment opportunities, and incentives for businesses to invest in us. Because the public dollars, if you look at it nationwide, and I'm always intrigued when I call my friend in California and I'm told that it's a furlough day. I'm not quite sure what that means, but you know.
It means they get paid for it.
Yeah, I know. I was trying to be kind, though. So, you know, the national trend of decreasing public dollars for public higher education is something that's going to require public-private partnerships. We're going to have to do a lot of hustling if we expect in any shape, manner, or form to do what we're trying to do now. And just as one, this is my own hobby horse, so I apologize if I'm using the bully pulpit here. When we look at the new dollars, a lot of it is really we are encouraged at the community colleges to look at occupational programs and try to get students into employment. While I believe, especially for my students, that's critically important, I'm also mindful of the fact that as a Puerto Rican president in a largely Latino institution, representing a sector of higher education where the majority of students of color go, that we not inadvertently create a higher ed poor door. And for those of you that are familiar with the real estate market in New York, whenever you have mixed income housing, the affluent people enter through one area and the poor people enter through another. You know, there's a real danger there that we have to be careful of. And I think everyone on this panel has spoken about the need to make sure that our students continue through the higher ed continuum. If it takes them 20 years. And some people do, going part-time, going in the evenings to get a bachelor's or a master's or a doctorate. But it's critically important that they get there if, as Dr. Garcia pointed out, our leaders are going to look like us.
Okay, thank you. So something that you said made me think of one of the things we haven't talked about. We've touched on it a little bit, is academic underpreparation and students who come into community college without the sort of math and English skills that they need to succeed in college level courses. About 60% of community college students are referred to developmental education, which is meant to try to get them up to speed in math and English. So some people have sort of pinned their hopes on the Common Core state standards as a way to try to help get students up to college level math and English before they graduate from high school, which is not happening in many high schools right now. But the Common Core state standards were developed without much input from colleges. Does anybody on the panel have any sort of comments about the Common Core state standards and whether you think they're going to be helpful, or how you are handling them, or any thoughts that you want to share with the audience?
Go ahead, David. No,
California,
you go.
no, you can do this.
No, go. You go for it.
Again, I don't want to overstate my knowledge of the Common Core state standards. So my skepticism, again, is just looking at the way it's being implemented in the New York City public schools, and let me use that as a caveat, that I have not seen to date the kind of alignment I was referring to earlier that would really make a difference. And I think we've all seen over the last 20 years an overemphasis on exams and preparing students for exams, and relatively little attention focused on outcomes and competencies. So again, it comes back to the same issue. We could put, new wine in old casks, or vice versa. But if we're not going to look at what we expect the outcomes to be critically, and make sure that the strategies we put in place are going to achieve those goals, where are we? We have new titles, new courses, and more work to do.
I'll add, in California, in addition to what Dr. Gomez is saying, is we're implementing Common Core, and we're not talking about how do we prepare teachers to be engaged in the Common Core. Where is the professional development money coming to prepare? If it's, the intention is a good one, and quite frankly, what we're doing now in poor neighborhoods to our children is abysmal. We should all be angry at what's happening to our children in some of these schools. So we're looking at different ways, the intention as well. But if we're going in a new direction, how clear are we making it to teachers? How are we preparing them for them? What is the professional development? How do we go up to scale? Where is all the money coming from to do all of this? We're putting in these things without thinking about there's a cost. You have to prepare people to go forward and do what they need to do. And quite frankly, I don't see that. I'm speaking for California.
I would add also that in terms of preparation, that we have to look at some of our own practices within the community college. We're beginning to take more seriously alternative assessments as ways of figuring out where students should be placed when they come into our institutions at Westchester. So we are going to be piloting, looking at some different types of metrics to help us assess students' readiness, the high school transcript, the ACT scores, where we have been very focused on looking at a limited assessment in terms of determining readiness for college level work. We are, I would also recommend, and we've not done it yet at my current institution, we did it at my former and saw really great results, is to eliminate the practice of cold testing, having students come in and take that battery of 4-hour tests when they've literally walked in to say, I want to go to college, they filled out an application, and within hours or days they are sitting in front of some material that is very unfamiliar. So we saw some significant changes, especially in English in Ohio, where it was by having a test prep experience, and that's a brush up, and it can help for those who simply need the brush up, those who need more critical remediation, more in-depth remediation. We established some bridge programming that was more focused on the diagnostic based on the feedback from their placement tests. So I would look at that, our internal procedures as well, so that it's not always just that they're underprepared. It could just mean that there's been some loss or needs to be a refresher. And the results were great. We saw that they were able to get into higher levels of courses, in many instances, especially in English, skip remediation altogether and succeed in the subsequent courses. So very valid in that regard.
And the Community College Research Center right now is working on some research on transition curricula, which is basically taking that senior year of high school and trying to make sure that you're preparing students to transition successfully and smoothly into college, and particularly the local community colleges, making sure that students understand what the standards are, doing early testing, doing some brush up if they need to, and also getting some of that college knowledge that Dr. Garcia talked about earlier.
Let me add that in California, it was my chancellor, the former Chancellor Reed, put in a program that I think addresses that. In the 11th grade with our high schools, there's something called the Early Assessment Program, where the students go ahead and take the English and math to see if they're going to be college ready. And instead of having a senioritis year where they're not doing much, they use the senior year to get prepared and have the local colleges of the CSU help in making sure the students get prepared so when they come into college, at least they don't come in with the developmental needs. And so we're tracking that to see how that's being successful, and it's working out in many of our institutions.
So there is a role for those of you who work in K-12 to try to reach out to your local community colleges and regional colleges to see if you can sort of create partnerships along these lines. So we have about 15 minutes left, and I'd like to open it up for questions. All right, let's see. We've got lots. Let's start with you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm a newly admitted student here and actually went to a community college, Borough of Manhattan Community College, and transferred 2 years after being there. Did not graduate because I could not pass the math course that you talked about. So I know of that all too well. My question is about, we talked about new initiatives towards helping students transition and transfer out. I am concerned with students transferring, and I'm wondering about how can we plug in students that leave community college, bring them back to their home colleges when they transfer out to four-year institutions. I transferred from BMCC to Sarah Lawrence, and it was a wonderful experience, but I stayed connected to my community college because it's near and dear to my heart, and I work with students there. But how can we maybe think about engaging students that have left to come back and show other people that it can be done and break down barriers such as informational barriers about understanding financial aid and all those other things that they have access to?
I would say invite them. And we certainly want the students to be active alumni. I met with two of my students yesterday afternoon. They're from the newspaper, and one is graduating in May, and the other one said, "Oh, I'm the kind of student that you know that you're not as proud of because I'm transferring without the degree." I said, "Oh no, I'm very proud of you. And when you go on to your receiving institution, we want you to let us know what's on your transcript. We want you to have a Westchester degree. We want you to come to the cool alumni parties, and we want you to be actively engaged." So we have to be able to maintain databases and systems so that we are in contact with those who have left us, even those who may not have the degree or credentials, so that they can be engaged. We know that in terms of affect, Dr. Garcia talked about being first-generation student, as I was, as so many students are. That sense of not belonging can be really overwhelming, and it could be so easy when you think about the environmental realities that you're leaving campus to go to that nobody understands. I'm doing these 3 jobs, I have these 2 children, I have these other demands. It's easy to let the college experience fall off. And so knowing that others who are similar to you, I came from the Ravenswood houses in Queens, so to be able to say that you can do it, you can make it, look at where, look at what's happened when I got through, here's how you navigate, find that support there. I think maintaining those contacts and taking very seriously the alumni network function.
I think the New York City Housing Authority has to be very proud of 3 distinguished alumni from Atlanta. No, I think you're right. Yeah, there are a number of models nationally, but one of the things that we're doing at Ostos, working with Lehman, both for those students who have transferred before they got a degree, is actually to give them dual enrollment, so that if they earn the credits, they could still get an Ostos degree, which is important to have them come back and connect with us. You know, we have a presidential ambassadors program where students come and they serve as guides and hosts at public events. We have a very active culture and arts program. So there are things, we even had Jay-Z the other, which I had more people for Jay-Z than any other literary series. I mean, go figure. No, you have to, in any alumni engagement activity, you have to give students a reason to want to belong. If not, I mean, they could love the college and be very grateful, but as has been pointed out, they have very busy lives. So why come back? Why do the alumni come back here to TC? There has to be a reason.
Hi. So there's been a lot of emphasis for quite some time now on teaching models, both in 2-year and 4-year institutions. And gone are the days when you can have full-time faculty, all face-to-face classes for the duration of the student's stay. I'm wondering how that is playing out in the community colleges. How are you using adjuncts? How are you using technology, and what other means you have to keep the cost down but the quality as high as it can possibly be?
Well, I will say that use of technology is critical. We have so many digital natives that are coming to our institutions, and so we have to make sure that that we are state of the art in terms of innovative pedagogy that we're providing for students. So looking at distance learning options, not so much as a cost containment factor, but as a relevant way to provide instruction. I had the pleasure of interviewing one of our potential psychology faculty who's a TC alumna, and she mentioned being in John Black's class, and I said, gee, I was in that class in 1980 something, and we talked about the evolution of technology. So I think that we have to be very relevant for learners. We certainly value adjuncts within the community college who bring expertise based on the practical knowledge that they have, many of them presently in the workforce, who bring that skill set into the classroom and who are connecting to students in very meaningful ways. But I think we must emphasize, as we've heard on this panel earlier, that we have to have responsibility for professional development for all of our faculty so that they're aware not only of the technology resources that are available and how to connect with students and use supplemental materials and smart boards and social media for connecting, but also the fundamentals of learning, the kinds of stuff, the kinds of things that many of us learned in the classrooms here at TC as educators, the education part of teaching, not just the discipline. So it's something that institutions have to retool to make sure there are resources to support that ongoing professional development of both our full-time and our adjunct faculty.
No, absolutely. I think look, most of the faculty that come to us are content experts. They're chemists, physicists. Many of them don't know how to be teachers. So an aggressive professional development program, Center for Teaching and Learning, faculty development activities are critical. If you're going to recruit, and at least at CUNY, to hold faculty rank, even at the community college, you have to have the same credentials that you are required to have at the senior colleges. So they come to us with PhDs, which is really good, but may never have taught a class before, and now they're in front of 30, 35 students. And for any of you who have ever taught, remember that first terrifying day in front of a class? And some of us actually had preparation to do it. So, I think there's a tremendous investment in professional development. But in addition, I think it's balancing the adjunct faculty and the full-time faculty. Because even with technology, at least for many of our students, it's critically important in their early stages that they have that face-to-face, that they become part of our college and our culture, and develop the skills that will allow them to be successful independent learners, which is what you need to be able to do to successfully use the technology. So, we have to continue to reappoint and develop our adjunct faculty and give them opportunities for professional growth, to use that as kind of a training ground for future full-time faculty members. So the best and brightest of our adjunct faculty, who are many times graduate students working on their PhDs, to actively recruit them, make them part of the family so that they can transition. And our adjunct faculty serve as kind of a balance in terms of the shifting vagaries of enrollment. For community colleges, since our budgets are largely driven by enrollment models and the funding associated with it, you'd be irresponsible not to use that as a resource. So it's a very complicated balancing act, but it's something that you have to attack aggressively. If not, you're not only hurting the institution, but more importantly, you're hurting the students.
While I was at 4 of the CUNY two-year schools and at SUNY Downstate, we developed some very interesting programs. I was just wondering whether something like this could be duplicated at some of your institutions, or whether you have them. We actually trained paraprofessionals working within the Department of Education who were represented by the UFT, DC 37, who would actually pay for courses leading to a 2-year degree, eventually moving up to career level. Also 1199, the Hospital and Health Workers Union, has that career level. Do these programs exist within your institution? Again, that's going to bring in new students who, again, are needed in education and healthcare because of their multilingual, multicultural skills, and also to bring in additional revenues.
I would certainly welcome the opportunity to partner. As you've mentioned, my sister was actually in one of those programs, the paraprofessional, so I'm familiar with that model. What I've discerned in my first 90 days, which are my only tenure with my current institution, we're actually at the end of a similar partnership with Verizon, and so we're actually looking at those incumbent workers, and so I'm a big supporter of contract training and upskilling individuals who are in roles who need new skill sets in order to move up their career ladders. Like we mentioned, the succession planning that's happening within our sector, it's happening across the nation when we look at the national demographics and just boomers and Gen X and Gen Y, the generational dynamics. And so we need to have people who are able to move into management, and our institutions are very well poised to provide that training. It means working closely with faculty to design the curriculum based on those professionals who are in those industries. And I would be delighted to sit down with DC 37, 1199, et cetera, and see what we can do to help those workers get those skill sets. We have the curriculum available, and it would be most welcome. So thank you for reminding us of that opportunity.
Yeah, we have a lot, as you know, a lot of partnerships with the unions, and I think the key for us is really to make that link between the certificate continuing ed pipeline through to the degree, the so-called stackable credential, so that not only do we provide that pathway, but that students don't have to repeat the experiences unnecessarily, so that they can move from a certificate into an associate's degree, into a bachelor's degree, or advanced degree, if it's appropriate. So we have work with 1199, the Health and Hospitals Corporation. I've met probably, back in the day, Millie and I would remember, they used to say the Bronx is burning, now the Bronx is hot. I've met with more contractors and developers than I have with any other sector. So how do we partner with the construction trades, with the architects, so that our students can go to, in our case, City College across the way, into the School of Engineering or Architecture where appropriate, and build those links, again, from the continuing ed certificate through a PhD program.
I want to keep going to the front row.
Just fling it into the back.
Thank you so much. Hi, my name is Javier Ruiz, and I'm so excited to hear your voices. I'm an immigrant from Peru, and I kind of dedicated my life to English language learners and special needs students. Both as a teacher, the bulk of my teaching in the South Bronx, as a curriculum developer, and now as a professional developer, again, focused on ELLs across the nation. And you guys brought up, you pulled at my heartstrings. Number one is I provide professional development for special needs and ELLs. I'm very unaffordable. Particularly for my neediest communities. And second, something that the young lady said before, which reminded me of a great quote from Michelle Obama, when you go through the door of opportunity, you don't slam the door shut. So a couple of you, Dr. Gomez, you mentioned kind of linking public schools to community colleges, but I'm thinking particularly in the South Bronx, and I hate to say this, like high school is sometimes too late. So I'm wondering what kind of partnerships you have with middle schools or what you were thinking with ideas or projects you currently have or you would like to have in the future to kind of establish these bonds and guide teachers, particularly students, in establishing these communities that kind of, instead of telling, I know not in my case, but I know a lot of Latino families, African American families, you kind of are told, you know, get out of here and don't come back. Like, do what you can to get out of this situation and like be successful, but we don't come back. And it's important to come back and to give back. So I just wanted you guys to, whatever thoughts and ideas you have about these issues. Thank you.
So one of the things that we've started at Cal State Fullerton is through our colleges is to begin to work in our neediest K-12s and work with those teachers and children and help them get through, mostly Latino in Southern California. And making sure that we're not only talking to the children and they're learning from our teachers, that we're talking to the parents in the language of which they are more comfortable in. So I'm going to give a very quick example that I'm very proud of. I started this at Dominguez Hills because it's important that we speak to families. We know that for underrepresented individuals, families mean the world to us, and families have a big influence on us. We started something about how to get your child through college, and it started like IKEA. Everybody been to IKEA? Well, we set it up from kindergarten all the way through college. Boots, everybody was trained to speak in Spanish. Giving out information. We did a partnership with Univision, the largest TV network in the country. We had their anchors come. So that they did PBSs on all the radios and television in Southern California, talking about the importance of a degree for the Latino community in California. The first year we did that, we had 1,000 people. The last year that I was at Dominguez Hills, we had 50,000 people on my campus on a Saturday, which shatters the myth that Latinos don't care that their children go to college. And what they learned all along, and we gave out posters that we still give out at the CSU in Spanish. What your children should take from K through 6th grade, what they should take in junior, middle college, and what they should take in high school, and what they should be prepared to go into college. Regardless if it's community college or 4-year, we want them to understand the pipeline. And so it is about going into the communities. It's being there, speaking to them, and letting them know that college is for them. Because when I was growing up, the university was for rich people. And so we've got to break that myth for low-income students.
That's great. Thank you.